He was awoken by an all too familiar sound. This early morning gray of dawn was coming forth from the black of night. And the fear that struck his heart shattered what remained of the darkness in the house. The cacophony of noise, the pounding of the hoofbeats, he knew what it meant. And so quickly, he tried to wake the rest of the family. He tried to get them outside, into the trees, away from the homes. But suddenly he realized that the hand that was holding him was no longer there. And in the next instant, he heard the shriek of a, "Daddy, help!" And then in his life, it was all silence. He turned, he looked, he searched. But his little girl was no longer there. His heart broke that day. He didn't think that God could ever do that to him. He spent the day in the woods. And that night he went home to an empty house. That's the prologue that we don't see in 2 Kings chapter 5. That's the part of the story that isn't there, because the story only picks up from what happened to that little girl that day. The rough hands that had grabbed her, pinned her to his side as she kicked and she squirmed to no avail, as proudly he rode back to Syria with a present for his boss. It says in 2 Kings chapter 5, "Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. The sins of the nation of Israel were coming home to roost. And that day, in that house, in the life of that man, sin had taken his daughter away. We don't know one thing about this little girl. We don't know her age. We don't know her name. We don't know what town she was from. We only know one tiny piece of information about this little girl. This little girl had a father and a mother who knew the true God. And if you're going to be known for one thing in life, be known for that. In Prophets and Kings, page 245, Mrs. White gives us a summation of this young lady and the earlier days of her life. She writes, "The conduct of the captive maid, the way she bore herself in that heathen home, is a strong witness to the power of early home training. There is no higher trust than that committed to fathers and mothers in the care of the training of their children. Parents have to do with the very foundations of habit and character. By their example and teaching, the future of their children is largely decided. We know not in what line our children may be called to serve. They may spend their lives within the circle of the home. They may engage in life's common vocations or go as teachers of the gospel to heathen lands. Taken from the chapter on Naaman. I like to think that Mrs. White knew what she was writing when she wrote the words, to heathen lands, within that chapter. This little maid was just a bit of a thing. But at her young age, she had a life-altering event. And she found herself in the home of basically the commander-in-chief of the army of Syria. Presented to his wife as her personal maid. We don't know when this happened. Again, we don't have the whole backstory of the situation, but we know that at some point, one morning, Naaman woke up. And as he bent over to wash his face in the basin of water, he thought it was just a pimple. But the next day it was still there. And the next day it was still there. And then it turned from red to white. He went about his duties. He went before the king. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't stop thinking of that spot. And a couple weeks later, he noticed one on the back of his hand. And then on his thigh. And he couldn't deny it. And he went into the king. And he said, Your Highness, I have to leave. Because I am a leper. The house was crushed. The army was crushed. The nation was on high alert. As the commander-in-chief announces that he has leprosy. Back home, we can't begin to imagine the emotions that Mrs. Naaman was going through. And yet, that little girl, 9, 10 years old, comes up, puts her hand on that lady's arm, and says, if only your husband could go to Samaria, he could be made well by the prophet Elisha. This little bit of a thing, looking at the most mighty man of valor in all of Syria. And she's letting his wife know, if only he can go to Samaria, what's it say in verse 3? For he would heal him. This little bit of a thing had learned, she had watched, she had listened. And when Naaman came home that night, his wife relays the information from this little girl. But Naaman's issue was not just a bit of a thing. It was life-altering. He knew the outcome of this diagnosis, there was no cure. It meant death. Naaman's life was altered that day. But the effect of little maid was also life-altering, because when he went to bed that night, he thought to himself, why not? I've got nothing else to live for. I'm going to have to leave home anyway. Why not see if this is true? Now stop for just a second, because I love the Bible and I love to be in the Bible. Stop for just, he is the commander-in-chief of a nation's army, and he's going to listen to a 10-year-old girl? This little runt, this little slave, starts working on the psyche of the most powerful military man in the nation of Syria. He makes one more trip to the castle, to the throne, and he says to the king, I don't know why I'm doing this. I haven't got a clue. But you know what? This little girl, she's got something. She's got something about her. And I might as well go find out. The king writes a letter, and the king sends a gift. Now, I don't know if you've ever studied this. It's a short little section of verse 3. It says, so the king of Syria said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothes. As of Monday, 10 talents of silver equals 750 pounds of silver at $21.81 an ounce is roughly $262,000. 6,000 shekels of gold is 3,200 ounces of gold at $1,851 an ounce is $5,923,000. And 10 complete changes of clothes at Joseph A. Bank, meaning shoes, socks, pants, belt, shirt, tie, kerchief, and an overcoat is $1,500. So $15,000 worth of clothes. For a grand total of $6,200,000 was loaded on the pack animals for the trip to Samaria. Now remember who's doing this. The king. Therefore, if you use royal measurements for a talent, which is 150 pounds per talent, not 75, and a shekel of gold, if it was a royal shekel, was 0.8 ounces, not 0.53 ounces, you come to the lofty amount of $9,500,000 is going with Naaman to Samaria. This isn't some small little thing. They arrive in Samaria, and oh my, is the king ever taken by surprise? He reads this letter. Does he know what leprosy is? Of course he does. And he tears his clothes, way more than a suit at Joseph A. Bank, and he says, who am I? Am I God? Can I bring a man back to life? keep this in geographical. I mean, Israel could not have been a better example for me today, okay? Samaria was being overrun by Syria whenever Syria felt like it. And now the king of Israel is sitting on his throne going, oh, good grief, they're expecting me to heal this guy. I can't heal this guy. They are going to absolutely wipe us out. There's a lot of geopolitical things going on in that verse when he admits that he can't heal this guy. But it was that when Elisha, verse 8, the man of God, heard the king of Israel had torn his clothes and had sent to the king, saying, why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. What had little maid told him? If only you could go see the prophet, he will heal you. So he goes. Naaman went. And this is where this story becomes more real. Okay, when we think of his horses and his chariots, okay, here he is in his chariot, and here's a couple horses. We got $6 to $9 million of stuff coming with us, okay? This isn't just a guy on a horse riding through the countryside. And they pull up to Elisha's house. And he gets off his chariot. And I am sure he has his finest on. And he has one of the servants go up and knock on the door. And out comes Gehazi. And the messenger said, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. I don't know about you, but if I'm expecting to see the president of a company and I get his secretary that comes out and tells me what to do, I'm not going to take too kindly to that. I call the next 2 verses shunned and stunned. But Naaman became furious and went away and said, indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy. Okay, newsflash. Naaman had a thing in his mind as to how this was going to go. He had a plan. And that plan didn't happen. Instead, this servant comes out and tells him to go wash in the most disgusting river in most of Judea. Silty, dirty, nothing like the crystal clear waters in Damascus. And he goes from stunned to irate. Are not the Abana and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be cleaned? So he turned and went away in a rage. This is why it tells us in the story of Naaman, when told to wash in the Jordan, his pride was touched. The proud spirit of Naaman rebelled against following the course outlined by Elisha. The rivers mentioned by the Syrian captain were beautiful by surrounding groves, and many flocked to the banks of these pleasant streams to worship. But it was only through following the specific directions of the prophet that could healing be found. Willing obedience alone would bring the desired result. We get to verse 13. And his servants came near and spoke to him. Catch the noun that they use to show you what kind of man Naaman really was. These servants came and spoke to him, saying, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it?" We're going to stop here for a second. We're going to define what it is. Some of the people in this church know I may be pretty adept at athletics and enjoy athletics when I was much younger and skinnier. In sports, there are a very, very few that are termed to have it. And those few don't even need their whole names. Bird, Magic, Big Poppy, in my best Howard Cosell voice, Reggie, 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 Brady, LT, Gretzky, Orr. In Hollywood, in music, the ones that have the it factor are universally known. For the older folks in the audience, Humphrey. For the younger ones, The Rock or Hallie. Prince. You don't need to know who they are by their full name. They have the it factor. See, in the rest of sports, you have Jags. You know what Jags are? Just a guy. You have lots of Jags. You have lots of bit actors whose names scroll by faster than you can read at the end of a movie. But only a very few have the it factor. It, such a small word, but can have major implications depending on what is being described by this tiny word. It is amazing to me the major difference one little letter of the alphabet can change if you take the word bit and minus the B. If he had asked you to do some great thing, scale a mountain, sail the ocean, would you have done it? But why not this small thing? The entire story is hanging right here on a 2-letter word. If you were asked to do something great, would you have done it? And if you're thinking along the same line as Naaman's servants, then you're missing the point of this story and this sermon. It isn't physical. It's spiritual. Naaman is standing there battling a foe stronger than he had met on any battlefield because he was battling for his soul. He had an idea of what he thought was going to take place so that it would be easy, convenient, and this could stay a bit part of his life. Unfortunately now, it is front and center. Was pride and self-dependence, those things that he had relied on his entire life to this point, going to continue to control and dominate his attitude? Or was this new virgin idea called faith? Whatever it was that little girl showed day after day, week after week in his household, was that going to take hold and manifest itself in Naaman's life? Mrs. White says that there was a battle but obedience won out. This is the crossroads at which Naaman found himself. And it's not an easy place to find yourself. You see, it can be inconvenient. It can be messy. It can be painful. It can be life-altering. And yes, it can be life-altering. That was the crossroads that Naaman found himself at. Was he going to let this God of little maid be the it of his life, or just a bit of his life? So he went down and dipped 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. And I think there's a huge, huge joke in that line. Because I like to picture Naaman as big, bulky, hairy, tough, nobody messed with. That's how you get to be that back in the olden days. It wasn't because you were smart. It's because nobody else could beat you up. And when he went down for the 6th time, he went down a dirty, leprous, hairy man. And when he came up, I think every one of those servants' eyes bugged out. I think they almost fainted dead away. Because up came a man who had skin as soft as a baby's bottom. The beard was gone. The thick arm hair was gone. He had new flesh. Because it doesn't just say the spot on his face or the spot on his thigh was gone. It says his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. He was clean physically, but even better, he was now clean spiritually. Now for the rest of the story. I love the fact, I was so awesome that we had a Paul Harvey. I love Paul Harvey, and I love using things about Paul Harvey. So that was great. I even have it in my sermon note right there. Now for the rest of the story. The Paul Harvey moment of this story. And I am 57 years old now, and I had missed this verse my entire life. So he returns to the man of God with all his aides and came and stood before him. Notice all the aides are now standing there. What are all the aides carrying? Oh, I don't know, maybe like a whole lot of silver and bags of gold, and you got about 5 guys each carrying 2 suits of clothing. And they're all standing outside the door of Elisha's home. And he says, indeed I know that there is no God in all the earth except Israel. Now therefore please take a gift from your servant. But he, Elisha, said, as the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive nothing. And he, Naaman, tough when we get the he's going back and forth, and he, Naaman, urged him to take it, but he, Elisha, refused. This next verse, I do not know how I have missed this for all the years that I've been a Seventh-day Adventist. But I don't want us to miss it today. So Naaman said, then if not, please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god other than the Lord. He is so changed that he's willing to give $6 million worth of stuff to Elisha. And when Elisha says, no, man, I'm good. I got God. That's all I need. He is so impressed that he says, give me what you have. Give me some dirt that when I go back home to Syria, I have God's dirt to kneel on. What an awesome testimony. What a fantastic idea. It is the first recorded church plant in the entire Bible. He is taking the church from Samaria to Syria. But you know what? It gets even better. Verse 18. Yet in this thing may the Lord pardon your servant. When my master goes in the temple of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow down in the temple of Rimmon. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing. Why does he suddenly get so technical? I'll give you a clue. This is a phenomenal example of being in the world, but not of the world. He has a job to perform. His job is the personal bodyguard of the king. So whenever the king leaves the throne, he goes with him. And so he suddenly realizes, oh my goodness, I've had this life-altering event. I now believe there's only one God, and that's the God of Elisha, the God in heaven. But when I go back home clean, I'm going to resume my job, and my job is to follow the king, and the king is going to go worship his God. To me, there can be no greater example of somebody who says, God, I have to do my job, but I'm going to be faithful to you even in my job. And Elisha says what? Oh, no, man, look, in Testimonies Volume 6, you got to live like this, and this is what Revelation says. Is that what he does? No. Does Elisha recognize the faith that this man is showing him minutes after a life-altering event? Absolutely it is. And he says to him, lost my page, sorry. And he says to him, go in peace. Go in peace. And he does. And if the story had ended there, it would have been phenomenal. But the story doesn't end there. You see, Gehazi had it. It was shown to him on a daily basis by Elisha. It was demonstrated to him by the miraculous works he saw every single day of his life. It was right in front of him every week at Sabbath school and church. It would have allowed him to become the next prophet of Israel. It was right there for the taking every single day of his life. But sadly, it was only a bit part of Gehazi's life with God. And when Gehazi's crossroad moment came, the God it was nowhere to be found. Because as the world became a greater part of Gehazi's life, God became a bit part in his life. And the consequences of these crossroads moments had just as eternal effect on Gehazi as it did on Naaman. You see, Naaman's holy ground dirt became Gehazi's resting place dirt. Because when the crossroads moment came, it was just a bit of Gehazi's life. Each man came to the crossroads. Each man had a single defining, life-altering moment decision to make. One chose to go the way of God. The other chose the way of the world. I hope we don't miss this next point. God has put or will put a crossroads moment in your life. If you're a young person, it will come. If you're a young adult, you're probably in them right now. And if you're as old as me or older, you've hit several. Doesn't mean you're not going to hit another one, but you've hit several. God will put someone in your life to show you an example of it. They're not perfect. They're not to be idolized. But they're someone who has been in the battle. They are somebody who has been wounded. They bear the scars. But they have come through it and found that God's sacrifice and gift and Christ's grace is worth it. Is worth it being the it of your life. And like Naaman and Gehazi, you will have a crossroads moment. I guarantee it. Because that's what this life is all about. And when you hit that crossroads moment, it's my prayer, and it's the prayer of all those sitting here today that will watch you hit that crossroads. That you will determine, as a little 10-year-old girl determined, I want to have God in my life more than that bit thing that has come up against me. When we can see that, when we can see that our choice may not be easy because Satan will make sure it's not easy. But when we see that and we choose to sacrifice our pride and our self-dependence, then we can be made clean outside and in by Jesus Christ. May Jesus become the it of your life. May He surround your life so fully that you will have no part of the bit that the world offers in compared to the it of the God of heaven. Then you, like Naaman, can stand on the riverbank and shout, I am healed, I am clean, I am redeemed. Our closing hymn.